So many people I know are scared, but they are hiding and not speaking up. How can we dissent and challenge without endangering ourselves? Well, I think that every person right now needs to make their own assessments, right? If you are an immigrant in this country and you are on a visa and your visa is very precarious, and Marco Rubio and the administration has been like, don't do this, don't do that, you are far more vulnerable than a US citizen. I think we can look around and look at the power that we have in a given moment. So much of our power right now is in witnessing, genuinely taking out your camera and filming interactions is very important, especially if ICE later on tries to claim that there was some huge riot and there was nothing at all in particular going on. It's important to have evidence of that. But also, I know this may sound a little silly, but humor is genuinely very important. These people want to seem all powerful. They want you afraid of them. And there is a lot to be afraid of. There is a lot at stake. And there is a lot of risk in this moment. But the last thing they want you to do is laugh at them.
I completely agree with AOC here that humor is really important, that we deprive them of power when we refuse to be intimidated, that mockery and ridicule are incredibly important tools in this moment. But I really want to focus on what she said at the beginning in terms of personal risk. I know I've touched on this in my videos on nonviolent resistance, but when we decide that we're going to get involved in grassroots organizing, we're going to get involved in some kind of resistance work, one of the most important things that we can do is to do a risk assessment for ourselves. And not just to do it once when we first get our toe in the water, but to continuously be reassessing our risk. What is our risk tolerance? What's the threshold for us? Months and months ago, I got dragged by somebody on TikTok who was like, why aren't you down at the ICE facility every night protesting? Well, you're not like really involved in resistance because you're not down here with us at night getting tear gassed and pepperballed. So therefore, you're not legit. I gently pushed back against that then, but I want to more forcefully push back against it now. We all have different roles to play in the resistance, and we all have different risks that we can undertake. We all have a different risk threshold. One of the most beautiful things about resistance work, one of our greatest strengths, is our diversity. We don't all have the same capabilities. We don't all have the same level of risk. We aren't all doing the same things. In fact, it's really important that we diversify our tactics, that we are coming at this from all angles. The kind of resistance work I do looks very different from somebody else who has a very different life than me, very different capabilities, very different strengths. Not everybody is going to be able to be protesting in front of ICE. Maybe they are a caregiver for an elderly relative. Maybe they have small children. Maybe their immigration status or their loved one's immigration status means that they have a different risk assessment than you. When I did this nonviolent resistance boot camp earlier in the year, back in October, one of the most important parts of it, I thought, was when we had this workshop on civil disobedience. And we kind of gamed out these scenarios. We had drills that were like very gentle. People were role playing as law enforcement or as counter protesters. And there was like gentle nudging, right? There was some gentle pushing. It's not the kind of brutality that you would experience in real life, but just those very low level, low risk scenarios that people went through. You could see people in the workshop being like, oh, I have not done a proper risk assessment. Oh, I thought I was somebody who should be on the front lines at protests. I thought I was somebody who should be there being willing to get tear gassed, but I actually didn't properly assess the risk. And now that I've gotten this tiny glimmer of what it's like maybe physically this is not something that I'm up for. Maybe actually my limitations make me not only a vulnerability to my family members and the other obligations that I have outside of this particular protest I'm considering engaging in, but maybe they also might make me a vulnerability for other folks, for my allies at this protest. I thought it was so important for people to get that firsthand experience, to be like, oh yeah, it seems really sexy and really noble. And a lot of us, we want to sacrifice, we want to give, we desperately want to do something to help out, to stop this madness, to contribute to the resistance movement. And we're being told by other people that, like, being on the front lines at a protest where ICE might brutalize you, where you might get arrested, where you maybe decide you're going to engage in civil disobedience and knowingly get arrested, that's what real resistance work is. It is real resistance work for people who have assessed risk and are like, yep, this is my spot. This is where I plug in. This is where I'm meant to be. But for most of us, that's not it. We have a different level of risk assessment. So I guess I would just encourage you, when you're looking at how to plug in and you're looking at some of these bigger, more public actions with a greater level of risk to your body, to your freedom, to your finances, don't be naive. Go in with your eyes wide open and take a realistic assessment. Because what we don't want is people stepping into actions and then being hesitant and then being like, I actually didn't consent to what's happening here. You want to consent in advance. You want to game out the situation and then say, I know what I'm stepping into. I understand the risk and I willingly accept that risk. This is such an important component of resistance work. Be real with yourself. Be real with the folks that you are organizing with. We had one scenario that we workshopped where we're all blocking a bridge and law enforcement comes out and they tell us to disperse. And we are like, no, we're not going to disperse. The question was posited, what if they bring out fire hoses? Would you be willing to experience that, to be on the other end of law enforcement turning a fire hose on you? And so many people were like, oh yeah, I would for sure. And then we talked about what really happens when you get hit with a fire hose. It can break your ribs. It can send you flying several feet back in the air. You can end up with broken bones. You can end up with a concussion. You can end up with internal organ damage. Like this is not the same thing as a garden hose. Are you still willing to take that risk? Now that you are informed, are you still willing to give your consent to that activity? And boy, oh boy, the answers changed, y'all. And there's nothing wrong with that. There should be no shame in saying, this is not for me. This is not my moment. This is not where I am going to be useful. This is a risk I am unwilling to take right here, right now. Be honest with yourself. Be honest with your team members. And we all need to come into it with no shame and no judgment. We don't shame, we don't judge other people for saying, this is the line for me. I'm not willing to cross this line yet for the following reasons. Don't make people justify themselves. Don't make people defend their choice. Respect their risk assessment. And then I would just encourage you and everybody else, be constantly reevaluating your risk, because your risk threshold is going to change. As the regime escalates, you may be willing to take on bigger risks than you were before. Or your neighbor, your person in your team may have to pull back and say, actually, now I am being targeted in a particular way that says I need to back off from this action and do something that's a little bit more low profile for a while. No shame, no judgment, adequate risk assessment. There are ways we can all work to resist fascism. There is really good, meaningful, impactful work that we can all do. It doesn't have to be public. It doesn't have to risk you getting arrested. It doesn't have to risk you being brutalized. The more you can adequately assess risk, the more effective you will be. Remember, we say, who keeps us safe? We keep us safe. Assessing risk helps you keep yourself safe, helps you keep your teammates safe, helps further our cause. So I really appreciated AOC bringing this up. We don't all have the same risk threshold. And what that threshold is will be changing depending on our circumstances and what the regime tries. So keep reevaluating, y'all. Keep touching base with yourself. Keep taking in all of the data points and constantly working through, what's my risk threshold? What am I willing to give? How can I be most effective here?